Hi, today I will tell you an interesting story about how one day changed my life. Let's get started. I'll never forget the day the sky betrayed us. Up until that moment, summer had been as ordinary as any other. My life revolved around routine, work, friends, weekend gatherings. I lived in a small, unremarkable town called Bramblewood, where the biggest news was usually the open-air barbecue by the lake or the occasional county fair. But all that changed in one afternoon, an afternoon when black flakes drifted down from the sky, blanketing the town in a dark sheen that defied everything we knew about nature. I remember it was a Thursday. The heat in July was oppressive, the kind that saps your energy the moment you step outdoors. I left work early, my colleagues complaining about the poor air conditioning in our modest office. We had once again threatened to pool our money to buy a new unit, but there was little we could do beyond idle threats. It was too hot for serious action. The scorching sun hung high overhead in an impossibly blue sky, not a single cloud in sight. On my drive home, I flicked on the radio to some mindless pop channel, hoping to keep my brain from frying in the heat. Nothing seemed unusual, just the typical chatter from the DJ about celebrity gossip and summertime fun. Halfway down Maple Street, I noticed a strange flicker of movement in the rearview mirror. It looked almost like dust swirling behind my car, but something about it seemed off. I glanced up at the sky through my windshield. Still nothing but sun. I attributed the odd dust swirl to my exhaustion, focusing instead on an ice-cold soda that was waiting in my fridge. When I parked in my driveway, the strangest sensation washed over me. The air felt still. Not the usual midday lull, but an eerie silence that made my arms break out in goosebumps despite the heat. Even the cicadas, a staple of summer noise in our region, had fallen quiet. I shut off the car engine and got out. My feet scuffed against the asphalt, and my skin prickled with static electricity. The birds that typically perched on the telephone lines were gone. Not a single chirp broke the silence. I lifted my gaze to find the cause of this hush, and that's when I saw them. Tiny black flakes drifting down from the sky. They were so small at first that I mistook them for bits of ash, like someone was burning a large pile of leaves nearby. But there was no smell of smoke, and I realized the flakes were evenly spread across the horizon, hundreds, thousands of them. Their color was pitch black, an inky darkness that absorbed all light, making them stand out starkly against the bright midday sun. I called out to my neighbor, old Mr. Thompson, who usually spent his afternoons tending his tomato garden. He was nowhere to be seen. No one else was around either. My street was typically a quiet one, but in that moment it felt like a ghost town. The black flakes continued to fall, growing heavier by the minute, the way a normal snowfall might intensify before a blizzard. Except it was July, and snow, if it ever came, would be white. It took me a second to register that these flakes, drifting lazily on the wind, were actually cold. One landed on my bare arm, and I felt a biting chill in that one spot, as if someone had pressed an ice cube there. The flake disintegrated almost immediately, leaving a small smear of black residue. I rubbed at it with my fingers and felt a momentary tingle. Not exactly painful, but unpleasant. That was all it took for fear to replace my curiosity. I hurried inside and locked the door behind me, taking deep breaths to slow my pounding heart. My mind raced with possibilities. Volcanic ash, some sort of chemical spill, a freak weather phenomenon. I rushed to the bathroom and scrubbed my arm clean, watching as the black smear came off in soapy streaks. My skin looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a message from my friend Alicia, who worked across town. She asked if I'd seen the black stuff falling. She was freaking out, saying everyone at her office was either huddled by the windows or staring at their phones, trying to figure out what was happening. I called her immediately, and her normally steady voice cracked with anxiety. "They're telling us not to go outside," she said, half whispering. "You know that emergency alert system that never gets used except for amber alerts or severe weather? It just came on everyone's phone simultaneously." "Wait, I haven't seen anything. Let me check mine." Even as I said it, an alert chimed on my phone. The official text glowed on the screen. "Emergency. Alert. Stay indoors. Unidentified, fall is occurring. Await further instructions." Neither Alicia nor I had ever seen anything like that before. The wording was stilted, as though it had been thrown together at the last minute. A second alert came seconds later, repeating the same message. Then, the local radio station's emergency broadcast began to blare from my phone, an automatically triggered feed that cut into all regular programming. It was the kind of monotone voice I'd heard in tornado warnings, but never had it been used for unidentified fall. I asked Alicia if she could make it to my house, but she told me it was too late. The black flakes had turned into a veritable storm outside her office windows. They were swirling so thickly that she could barely see the parking lot. "You're not thinking of going out there, are you?" she asked, panic creeping into her tone. I don't think I will. It seems dangerous, but..." My voice trailed off as I looked through the living room window. The black snowfall was falling steadily now, so dense that my yard had already turned from lush green to charcoal gray. It looked as if a layer of soot was collecting, but it was building up like real snow. A strange hush had come over the neighborhood. No cars passed on the street, no voices echoed from the houses. The silence was uncanny. I told Alicia to stay safe, locked all my doors, and shut every window. I even dragged towels to seal the gaps under the doors. The fact that this was happening in the middle of a scorching July afternoon felt like a waking nightmare. I then tried to call my parents, who lived a few blocks away. No answer. I left a message telling them to stay indoors, and that I'd come by once this bizarre weather let up. I checked social media, but it was flooded with people posting videos or pictures of the black flakes falling wherever they lived. This wasn't isolated to our small town of Bramblewood. From the posts, it looked like the phenomenon stretched across several counties, and who knew how far beyond that. I spent the next few hours glued to news broadcasts. Every channel was in a state of confusion. Meteorologists were on the air, stumbling through explanations. Some said it was a freak storm of black hail resulting from unusual atmospheric conditions. Others theorized industrial pollution from a chemical plant explosion. A few more outlandish channels speculated it was volcanic ash from a surprise eruption somewhere on the planet. But none of those explanations accounted for the fact that it was freezing cold to the touch, like real snow, and that it was piling up as though the temperature had suddenly plummeted. I paced around the living room. Despite the terror building in my chest, a part of me felt almost electrified, like this was some surreal movie in which I was stuck. Time seemed to slow down. Through the window, the black flakes continued their lazy descent, no sign of letting up. I nearly jumped out of my skin when my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Alicia, telling me that some people in her office had braved the flurries to get to their cars, and none had returned. Those who watched from the windows couldn't see exactly what was happening, only that the moment someone vanished into the swirling black snow, they never reappeared. "It's like they're just gone," she wrote. That text triggered a wave of cold dread down my spine. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe they got to their cars and drove away, but the visibility was too low for onlookers to notice. Yet somehow, that didn't feel right. There was an implicit finality in Alicia's words that ate away at me. The alert repeated on television, and the anchor, visibly nervous, told all viewers to remain indoors, to avoid coming into contact with this unexplained precipitation. They warned that the local government was sending out hazard response teams. That worried me even more. If this was a known type of phenomenon, they wouldn't need hazard response teams in full protective gear. Night fell. By 8 p.m., the entire town was coated in a thick shroud of black. Streetlights flickered eerily against the swirling flakes, casting shadows that made my skin crawl. The temperature reading on my phone said 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius. Yet, the black snow didn't melt. It sat on roofs, roads, lawns, cars, unchanged, as if defying the normal laws of thermodynamics. In bed, I couldn't sleep. The scratching of the flakes against my windows felt like nails on a chalkboard, a quiet hiss that set my nerves on edge. At around 2 a.m., my exhaustion finally overcame me. When I woke up, rays of sunlight poked through the curtains. For one blissful second, I thought I had dreamt it all. But as I made my way to the living room and peeked through the window, I saw the black drifts, nearly waist-high in some places. My street was eerily silent, with not even a single car passing by. I checked my phone again. No further emergency alerts. A swirl of dread and concern tugged at my stomach as I wondered what happened to my parents, my friends, even my co-workers. I turned on the TV, flipping channels, but nothing came on except static. It was as if every station had gone off air. The local news station displayed a technical difficulties screen, but no explanation was given. My internet was still working, albeit slowly. Social media was chaos. Conflicting reports, rumors of entire towns going dark. People claiming they saw figures moving in the snowfall. Hunger forced me to the kitchen. I rummaged through the cabinets for anything easy to prepare without leaving home. I still had power and running water, which I used gratefully. My mind raced with questions. Should I try to reach my parents? If they needed help, would I risk stepping outside? Could I even step outside safely? I decided against it for the moment. Reports online suggested that people who ventured out had gone missing. Some posts were made by individuals who claimed to have lost friends or family to the black snow. They'd watch them walk outside and vanish into the swirling darkness. In a handful of videos, you could see the outline of a person stepping into the flurry, only to dissolve into the inky haze. The image haunted me. I read a rumor that a few reckless souls had tried wearing improvised protective suits, winter coats, trash bags, hazmat suits if they had access, trying to retrieve supplies or find loved ones. But none of them seemed to return. One person posted a frantic live stream at night, shining a flashlight out the front door. The black flakes fell in thick curtains, and the glow of the flashlight illuminated swirling shapes. The voice behind the camera kept saying, "I hear something. I hear something out there." Then there was a sudden drop, the phone's camera spinning wildly, and the feed cut off. My imagination filled in the blanks. Did something lurk within that black snow, or was the snow itself alive? I didn't know what to believe anymore. My front door and windows suddenly felt like flimsy barriers between my safe haven and an unfathomable threat. The next day, the snowfall continued, unabated. It was darkening the skies now. Even at noon, it felt like twilight. I tried to keep myself occupied, reading, playing old CDs, anything to avoid thinking about what was happening. I rearranged my living room furniture out of nervous energy, but the worry about my parents gnawed at me. They lived just a few blocks away. Maybe I could handle a short trip outdoors if I was extremely careful. Yet, every time I mustered the courage, my mind flashed with the images of people vanishing. By the third day, my food stocks began to dwindle, and cabin fever set in. Alicia's messages had stopped sometime after her last text about coworkers disappearing. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a sign that she was okay. Nothing. The uncertainty was torture. I made a plan that evening. If this phenomenon showed no sign of stopping, I'd attempt to reach my parents' house come dawn. I wasn't sure how, but I scavenged for materials in the garage. Old tarps, duct tape, thick rubber gloves, winter boots. I was going to wrap myself up like a walking cocoon. It felt ridiculous, but desperation trumped pride. Before I could talk myself out of it, I spent half the night meticulously taping and layering. If I was going to do this, I wanted to protect every inch of skin from contact with those flakes. The fourth morning, I woke to the same grim sight. Black snow swirling under a leaden sky. My heart thumped as I stood by the front door, clad in my makeshift protective outfit. Even through the thick layers, I could feel a chill radiating from the doorknob. Carefully, I unlatched the locks and cracked the door open. A swirl of black flakes rushed in with a cold gust, dancing around my hallway before settling on the floor. I forced myself to remain calm. With one last deep breath, I stepped outside. Immediately, the cold bit through my layers, so intense that it felt like stepping into a polar vortex, not a summer day. The yard was unrecognizable, piled high with black drifts that crunched under my boots. Visibility was terrible. My plan was to head down the street, turn left on Pine Avenue, then 2 more blocks to my parents' house. I tried to move quickly. Each step was a struggle against the waist-high drifts. The black flakes clung to me like static, and though I had covered myself, I still felt them crawling against the tape, searching for a way in. I became acutely aware of every gap or seam in my improvised suit. Despite the swirling darkness, I could still see the shapes of houses and cars buried under the black. I reached the intersection but found it impossible to tell which direction was which. Every landmark was hidden under thick mounds. Still, I recognized a leaning street sign that read Maple and Pine. Relief flooded me. I pressed on, calling out, "Mom! Dad!" My voice was muffled by the layers over my mouth. It seemed to vanish into the whirling gloom almost immediately. 2 blocks, I told myself. Just 2 blocks. My boots sank deeper into the drift. At one point, I misstepped and fell. My arms plunged into the black snow, and I felt it biting through the tarp. A wave of pure terror hit as I scrambled to my feet, staggering. Were the flakes eating through my layers? My mind conjured horrifying images of them dissolving me, dragging me away, but I still remained intact. My suit, as far as I could tell, was undamaged. Finally, I spotted my parents' house. The roof was buried up to the windows in black drifts, but the structure was distinct enough. My eyes strained to see any sign of movement through the windows. The blinds were closed. I climbed the porch steps, which had turned into a black, uneven slope. My lungs burned from panic and the frigid air I was breathing. I banged on the door. "Mom! Dad!" No answer. I banged again, glancing behind me to make sure nothing lurked in the swirling dark. Still nothing. With a silent prayer, I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, and I pushed the door open. Inside, the house was dark, the furniture covered in an unsettling layer of black dust that must have blown in somehow. I tore off the duct tape and tarps, stumbling further into the hallway. "Mom? Dad?" My voice echoed. I flicked the light switch. The electricity was still on. The sight that greeted me was that of an empty living room. The coffee table was overturned, a magazine scattered on the floor. A lamp lay shattered by the couch. It looked as if there had been a struggle, or someone had left in a hurry. I checked the kitchen, half-eaten food on plates as if they'd left mid-meal. The chairs were knocked over, and the side door was ajar, letting in the swirl of black flakes. I closed it with trembling hands. Upstairs, their bedroom was empty too. The bedsheets were thrown aside, as though someone had leapt up suddenly. No sign of them. I found my father's phone on the nightstand, the battery dead. A swirl of panic mixed with helplessness. They had to be somewhere. But I also knew that if they stepped outside at any point, the chances were… I refused to finish that thought. Maybe they'd gone out in search of me or for supplies. Maybe they were holed up at a neighbor's house. Still, a nagging dread told me the truth might be worse. After a frantic search of the entire house, I found no clue about where they went. My body trembled as I realized I had to get back home. The cold was intense. My suit, now partially torn from the frantic search, wasn't as protective as before. I quickly patched the tears with leftover duct tape I found in the garage, steeling myself for the journey back. The streets were empty, not a soul in sight. Even though I moved as quickly as I could, the trek felt longer, as though the storm itself was conspiring to disorient me. The swirl thickened, and nightmarish shapes seemed to flicker just out of my peripheral vision. At one point, I heard a faint voice, a moan or a cry carried by the wind. I turned, calling out, but all I saw were swirling drifts of blackness. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shone my flashlight in that direction, the beam reflecting off the snow in weird, dancing patterns. Nothing. Convinced I was hearing things, I pressed on, adrenaline giving me the strength to stumble the final block back to my house. I practically crashed through my front door, collapsing onto the floor, slamming it shut behind me. My arms and legs felt numb, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I tore off the remains of my makeshift suit and took a scalding shower, trying to wash away the black flakes that had clung to my skin. Even after I was physically clean, the sense of dread wouldn't leave me. I fell into a restless sleep on the couch. Images of my parents' deserted home, playing on a loop in my dreams. When I woke, the TV was on, filling the living room with static. It must have turned itself on when the power flickered. The clock on the stove blinked 12:00, indicating an outage. I grabbed the remote and flipped channels once more, only to find one local news channel partially broadcasting, the image flickering in and out. A harried reporter stood outside a government building somewhere, wearing a heavy coat and a respirator. Behind her, men in hazmat suits were loading equipment into trucks. In a crackling voice, she relayed that the phenomenon was widespread, affecting multiple states. The government had set up designated safe zones in certain areas, but it was unclear how well protected they truly were. The broadcast cut out before I could learn anything more. I wanted to figure out a plan, maybe reaching one of those safe zones, but I had no idea where they were located. My phone beeped with a sporadic signal. On social media, a single pinned message from the CDC recommended staying indoors and sealing all entrances. It warned that prolonged exposure to the black snowfall led to adverse effects, though it didn't elaborate. The rest of the feed was images of empty highways, abandoned towns, pleas from people searching for missing family, or disturbing videos of animals caught in the snow, lying motionless under black drifts. Time blurred after that. My days fell into a pattern. Check if the snowfall had stopped. Search for any broadcasts or new messages, ration out my supplies, and attempt not to lose my mind. Sometimes I imagined hearing voices outside, but whenever I peered out the window, all I saw was the swirling black. My entire world felt reduced to the confines of my house. Food was running dangerously low by the end of the first week. I had some canned goods left, but no fresh produce or meat. The stores, of course, were off limits. I caught myself pacing in circles, holding conversations in my head. The quiet was maddening. The only sound was the ever-present hiss of flakes against the windows. Then came a rattling at my front door. My heart nearly stopped. It was faint, like someone gently tapping. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard a definite series of knocks spaced out. Someone was out there. The knocks continued, and I felt an insane mix of hope and fear. I grabbed a flashlight and moved to the door, pressing my ear against it. "Hello?" I called. A muffled voice responded, "Please, let me in, please." A human voice. My brain scrambled for cautionary tales, the disappearance videos, the warnings. But how could I ignore a fellow human being outside in that lethal storm? "Are you alone?" I asked. "Yes, The voice trailed off, replaced by a violent cough. My hands trembled on the doorknob. Slowly, I cracked it open. Instantly, black flakes blew in, swirling around a dark shape that collapsed into my arms. The figure wore a hooded coat, face smeared with black residue. I pushed the door shut behind them, locking it. "Oh God," I whispered. It was a man, maybe in his 50s. His skin was pale, lips chapped. I eased him onto the floor. The black flakes had melted in spots on his face, leaving behind patches of charcoal residue. He looked up at me with desperate eyes. "Water," he rasped. I hurried to the kitchen and returned with a glass. As he drank, he trembled violently as though feverish. His clothes were soaked from the melting flakes, and I realized with horror that he must have been out there far longer than I had been during my trek. "My name is Travis," he said between coughs. "I lived on Elm Street, tried to get away, but nowhere to go." I helped him to the couch, listening to his halting words. He spoke about wandering the deserted streets, seeing silhouettes in windows but no one letting him in, hearing screams carried on the wind. My heart twisted at the idea of me almost ignoring his knocks, too afraid to open my door. He nodded off, delirious, and I managed to strip off his soaked coat, leaving him in a sweater and jeans. I brought blankets and started the fireplace. He coughed intermittently, a wet, rattling sound. My supply of medicine was limited, but I offered him the last of my cough syrup and some aspirin. That night, I woke to the sound of his groaning. He was on the couch, tossing and turning as if in great pain. I knelt beside him, horrified to see his skin had turned ashen, almost matching the black residue. Thick beads of sweat dotted his forehead. I tried to calm him. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It's inside me," he wheezed, eyes wide with terror. I froze, not fully understanding. Then he convulsed, coughing up a dark liquid that splattered onto my floor. My stomach lurched as the reek of decay hit my nostrils. I jumped back, covering my mouth. Travis reached for me, but I was rooted in place by shock. The convulsions grew worse. In a horrifying moment, he gasped one last time, then slumped. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. A sense of numb disbelief took hold. I'd only just let him in hours ago. Now he was gone, like so many others. My mind reeled, screaming that I had to do something. But it was too late. He lay still, eyes open, unseeing. For a moment, I could only stare at his body, guilt clawing at me. Then a new horror. His skin began to crack in thin lines like glass fracturing. A faint sizzling filled the air as black steam rose from his body. I leapt back, stumbling over the coffee table, unable to look away. Travis's remains darkened, flaking away like embers. Within seconds, his entire body disintegrated into black dust that drifted toward the window, sucked by some unseen current. I cowered against the wall, breath coming in rapid bursts. My living room was silent again, except for the low hum of the heater. The place where Travis had lain was now just a black stain on the couch. Everything about the moment felt impossibly surreal. My stomach twisted, and I barely made it to the bathroom before retching. Even after I cleaned up the residue with trembling hands, the stench lingered, haunting me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, hugging my knees, convinced that if I dared to sleep, the black snow might seep into my house and consume me. Morning light brought no comfort. The swirling flakes still shrouded everything, and the temperature read the same scorching 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, a twisted contradiction. To my dismay, Travis's demise gave me a new, awful perspective. The black snow wasn't just innocently cold. It did something terrible to living organisms. I thought back to the videos of vanishings. Perhaps that was the process that claimed so many. Was it instantaneous for them, or drawn out like Travis's end? The questions battered my mind. Now, there was no way I'd voluntarily step outside again. I rationed my remaining food, stretching each meal. My sleep became restless, punctured by nightmares of the black storm. Sometimes I dreamt I could hear my parents outside, calling my name, but when I flung the door open, it was only swirling flakes. Days merged into a fog of fear and hunger. I used any container I could find to fill with water in case the supply was cut off. The loneliness was suffocating. Eventually, I started talking to my reflection in the window, just for some semblance of conversation. Any glance outside showed the endless drift of black flakes, shining faintly even when the skies were dark. Then, out of nowhere, came the first sign that the snowfall might be weakening. It happened sometime during the second week. I woke up in the late morning, and as I parted the curtains, I noticed a slight thinning in the air. I could see the outlines of houses more clearly. I pressed my face to the glass, heart leaping at the possibility of an end to this nightmare. While it was still dark, the storm seemed less. Encouraged, I turned on the TV. The same local station that had flickered before now displayed a shaky broadcast from the news studio. The reporter, a grim-faced man in a rumpled suit, delivered an urgent bulletin. The black snowfall is slowing in some areas. The government is urging any remaining citizens to seek out designated safe zones. Maps and instructions will be broadcast on Channel 8. The hazard is not fully understood, but experts believe the danger of direct contact remains extreme. If you can remain indoors, do so. If you must evacuate, do it quickly and take every precaution. A map appeared, though the resolution was terrible. It looked like they were highlighting certain emergency shelters in the region, but the screen kept cutting out, making it difficult to pinpoint exact locations. It was enough, however, for me to see that one safe zone might be at the local high school, just a mile or so away. I recognized the shape of the highway near it, though the label was half garbled. I weighed my options. I was running out of food. The black storm was lethal, but if it was thinning, I might have a chance. My best hope for survival was to reach that safe zone. They might have resources and medical help, but the memory of Travis's last moments paralyzed me with doubt. In the end, survival instinct won. I prepared another suit, even more thorough this time. Multiple layers of plastic, duct tape, gloves, boots, goggles, a makeshift mask. I packed a small backpack with the little food and water I had left, plus a flashlight and a small first aid kit. My hands shook as I taped every seam. Before leaving, I whispered a small goodbye to my home, uncertain if I'd ever see it again. Then I opened the door. The black drifts were still piled high, but indeed the flakes were falling less densely. I set out, trudging slowly, my goal to reach the main road and follow it to the high school. The journey was surreal. Once familiar roads were buried, the street signs half visible. Cars, abandoned, jutted out of black mounds. No sign of life in the houses I passed, only broken windows or doors left ajar. Every so often I thought I saw movement within the swirling flakes, but my rational mind insisted it was a trick of the shadows. Or maybe I was losing it. I came across the local grocery store. Desperation for supplies tempted me to check inside, but the shattered windows suggested that the black snow had long since invaded. If anyone had holed up there, I doubted they were still alive. The thought churned my stomach. I pressed on, forcing myself not to linger in front of every building, calling out to ghosts. Along the way, I saw shapes under the snow. What might have been human forms or piles of clothing. I refused to dwell on them. My single-minded focus was the high school, perched on a small hill at the edge of town. After an hour of trudging, the building's outline rose through the haze. It was large and blocky, with a wide parking lot partially visible under mounds of black. The dryness in my mouth was from both thirst and fear. What if it was deserted? Or worse, what if it was a trap of some kind, an empty shell? If that were the case, I'd have nowhere else to go. But I kept walking. Up close, I saw an improvised barricade around the front entrance. Pieces of plywood, metal rods, and caution tape. My heart soared at the sight of anything resembling human effort. I banged on the plywood, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone in there?" For a moment, only silence. Then, a slot opened in the plywood, revealing a pair of eyes. "Who are you?" a voice demanded. My name is," I started to say, but the voice cut me off. "You clean? No bites? No direct contact with the snow?" I hesitated. I tried to protect myself. "Please let me in, I'm starving." Another pause. Then the plywood slid aside, revealing a group of figures in heavy protective gear. They ushered me inside, sealing the makeshift door behind me. I stumbled into the lobby, met with warm air. Actual warm air, not the bizarre heat that existed outside in contradiction to the freezing snow. One of them motioned me forward. "We have to decontaminate you," he said in a muffled voice behind a respirator. He led me to an area cordoned off with plastic sheets, where large industrial fans and hoses were set up. They hosed down my suit with a harsh chemical spray and then used brushes to remove any traces of the black residue. The spray stung my eyes, but I grit my teeth. I'd do anything to be safe from that nightmare outside. By the time they peeled off my outer layers, my skin was freezing, but the thick, warmer air inside the building revived me. Finally, I faced a tall man who seemed to be in charge, wearing a military jacket without a name tag. A dozen other refugees huddled in the hallway behind him, most wearing mismatched clothes and haunted expressions. "Welcome," the man said curtly. "You're lucky you made it." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. My eyes wandered to the people behind him. A young woman wept softly, clutching a blanket. An older couple held each other's hands. There couldn't have been more than a few dozen in total, scattered across the wide hallway in improvised cots. They looked like they'd been through hell. Over the next few days, I learned bits and pieces about what had happened while I was hunkered down at home. Military units and emergency personnel had attempted to respond en masse, but whatever this black snowfall was, it spread too quickly. Entire cities went dark. Communication networks failed, or broadcast old information on loop. Many emergency shelters set up in known buildings, but people traveling to them vanished en route or arrived infected. No one really knew the origin of the black snow or how it was able to stay frozen in the summer heat. Speculation ranged from biological warfare to a cosmic event. Some pointed to rumors of a meteor shower days before the first flakes fell. Scientists couldn't confirm anything with the labs in disarray. The only firm directive was to avoid contact at all costs. Over time, more survivors trickled in. Each arrival brought new stories of horror. Some saw monstrous shapes in the drifts. Others lost loved ones in front of their eyes. Everyone carried the same haunted look. But within these walls, we found a fragile semblance of community. We shared what little food there was, took turns guarding the entrance, and listened to faint radio transmissions that sometimes broke through the static. Despite this, the world outside remained trapped under the black storm. Weeks passed, but the snowfall only lessened slightly. We had no real means to fight it, only to wait and see if nature would restore balance. Morale was low. Tensions ran high as supplies dwindled. People argued, frightened, uncertain if help would ever come. Occasionally, we heard rumors of rescue operations in distant towns, but none arrived for us. As the black drifts began to recede, very slowly, almost imperceptibly, a handful of volunteers decided to venture out in search of more survivors and supplies. I almost joined them, but the memory of Travis's horrific end still haunted me. I wasn't ready to risk the black snow again, even if it had thinned. Then, a miracle of sorts. On a crisp morning, well into what should have been August, someone spotted a helicopter in the sky. A hush fell over everyone as we raced outside, ignoring the flecks of black still drifting in the air. The helicopter circled the school, shining a searchlight. Cheers erupted. This was the first aircraft we'd seen in weeks, proof that not everything was lost. The helicopter set down in the school's football field, stirring up clouds of black flakes. Armed soldiers in protective gear jumped out, waving us forward. Their voices crackled through a megaphone. "Evacuation transport. Come now." We flooded from the school building, ignoring the stinging chill of the swirling snow. Adrenaline drowned out any fear. As I dashed forward, backpack clutched against my chest, I remembered my parents, Alicia, my neighbors, everyone who hadn't made it. A pang of grief cut through me. I hoped, irrationally, that among the hundreds or thousands of survivors out there I might still find them somehow. That they might be waiting in another safe zone, scanning every face that arrived. The thought spurred my feet onward. We formed a ragged line to board the helicopter. The soldiers helped us up, urging haste. The roar of the rotors filled my ears, drowning out everything. The moment I stepped inside, relief washed over me, followed by dizzying exhaustion. Doors slammed shut, and the helicopter lifted off. I looked out the window. The town of Bramblewood lay below, a sea of black. Through the parted clouds, I glimpsed the rest of the region. Miles and miles of black drifts, silent and eerie in the midday sun. The flight was brief, carrying us to a larger base outside the worst affected zone. More stories awaited us there, of entire regions wiped out, of scattered enclaves still holding on. Rumors of a new wave of black snowfall in other parts of the country sent shivers down my spine. The black snow might be unstoppable, but we had no choice but to cling to hope, to gather as many survivors as possible, and to search for an answer, any answer, to this impossible phenomenon. I never found my parents. I never heard from Alicia again. I made inquiries at every shelter we passed, but no one had registered under their names. Eventually, the grim acceptance settled in that they had likely succumbed to the storm. My only solace lay in the fleeting thought that maybe they didn't suffer, that maybe it was quick. Time went on. The safe zone I ended up in was a converted military base. Life there was harsh but organized. We developed routines, chores, daily roll calls, distribution of rations. Scientists and specialists arrived in convoys, escorted by soldiers, setting up labs to study samples of the black flakes. I remember glimpses of them hunched over microscopes, their faces etched with a combination of fascination and dread. One rumor said the flakes were extraterrestrial, containing molecular structures never before seen on Earth. Another rumor claimed they were a weapon unleashed by an unnamed government, now out of control. No one knew for sure. All we knew was that the black snow's presence was receding in some zones while intensifying in others. Reports trickled in of more helicopters dispatching rescue teams, of convoys braving the drifts. A few survivors talked about glimpsing the black snowfall shift to gray or even white in certain areas, as though it were losing whatever macabre power it once had. But every piece of good news was tempered by stories of new outbreaks or entire towns going silent. My own nightmares persisted, replaying the moment Travis turned to dust in my living room, the sight of my parents' empty house, the fleeting encounters with shapes in the swirling dark. Yet I clung to the tenuous belief that we, as a species, would endure. That maybe, someday, we'd rebuild from the wreckage and unravel the mystery of the black flakes. Even as I sit here now, recounting these events, the world remains in limbo. The relentless summer heat still radiates overhead, while pockets of black snowfall linger in shattered towns. The base is abuzz with theories, rumors, half-truths. Some say the flakes came from space, part of a celestial phenomenon that will pass once Earth moves out of range. Others think an unknown entity willed this into existence. The only certainty is that humanity has been forced to adapt, to hide behind doors and windows when reality breaks its rules. I write this testament so that if someone else stumbles upon my words, they'll know what happened in those first harrowing weeks. How a stifling summer day turned into a swirling winter of black. How people vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only questions and despair. But also how a few of us, huddled in the corners of our homes or behind barricaded walls, managed to survive. Will the black snow eventually disappear? Will it leave our world haunted and battered but still alive? I can't say. But I do know that as long as we draw breath, we'll fight to see another sunrise, no matter what color the snow might be. If there's one spark of optimism I've retained, it's that life tends to persist even against the bleakest odds. We've found pockets of resistance, safe zones where people band together to share resources, knowledge, and hope. We discovered that in certain conditions, extreme sunlight or certain latitudes, the black flakes dissipate more quickly. We've learned that unity matters, that opening your door at the right moment can save a life, and that compassion can still exist in the midst of unimaginable horror. Though I fear another storm could come at any moment, I continue to look for signs of normalcy. A bird in the sky, a blade of green grass poking through the dark crust, the faint echo of children's laughter in a corridor. Each sign reminds me that we haven't lost everything, that we haven't let the black storm redefine us entirely. And so, in the aftermath, we wait, watching the skies, listening to the faint hum of radio static, clinging to the whispers that somewhere out there, humanity is rising to the challenge. The future remains uncertain, but those of us who witnessed the black snow firsthand will carry its memory with us always. In the end, maybe that memory will keep us vigilant, reminding us that the unthinkable can happen at any moment, but that we are still here to bear witness, to survive, and to hope.